And most importantly, I run home one more time. Well, here we go again. They're bombing us.
По нам дрон прилетел нахуй. Ебать! Да ну нахуй! Три, попали нахуй.
But these images are not from Kiev, Kharkiv or Odessa. This is the place Moscow's propaganda machine isn't showing you. The images are from Volgograd, Ryazan.
Well, this is the first time I've seen it here. Well, I just come here to study, a student from Morocco.
Samara and Saratov. On November 14th and 15th, refineries in these Russian cities were hit almost simultaneously. And these refineries were targeted for the first time by Bars jet UAVs. Here, look at the moment of impact in Samara. The first location where Bars made its appearance was the Ryazan refinery, approximately 470 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Let's look at the map again and understand the geographical genius of this attack. Ukrainian intelligence did not throw a dart randomly on the map. It selected the most critical point that would strike at the heart of both Russia's civilian and military infrastructure with surgical precision. The targeted Ryazan oil refinery is no ordinary industrial facility. It is Russia's fourth largest refinery and is located just 196 kilometers southeast of Moscow. In a vast geography like Russia, 196 kilometers means next door. Ryazan single-handedly meets a large portion of the gasoline and diesel needs of the Moscow metropolitan area and surrounding regions. It is the capital's main fuel supplier. Russia was already experiencing a serious fuel crisis affecting two-thirds of the country, stretching from Siberia to the southern regions. However, for the Kremlin, this crisis was on the periphery. The elites in Moscow and St. Petersburg were in a privileged position, watching the war on television. The strike on Ryazan is a move to bring this crisis directly to the Kremlin's doorstep, to the necks of Moscow's 13 million residents. This is an action that makes the war felt by millions of capital residents, triggering anxiety about potential queues and price increases at fuel stations. Some sources speaking to Reuters also indicate that Russia is attempting to compensate for this 20% capacity loss by bringing idle units back online. However, the shutdown of Ryazan's primary processing units, AVT6, heralds a gasoline crisis for Moscow traffic, with long lines at stations and prices skyrocketing. The Moscow elite has been watching the war on television until now. Now they will begin to feel the war in empty gas tanks and smoke in the sky. This is the moment when a logistical nightmare becomes a psychological weapon. Yes, psychology. Let's look at the psychology of the Russians that night. On the night of November 15th, the Russian people had neither stability nor security. In Ryazan, that civilian woman's question should echo off the Kremlin's walls. I don't understand where the air defense is looking. That night in Volgograd, Putin's billion-dollar air defense shield struck civilian buildings where his own people lived, instead of stopping Ukrainian drones. And the official response? Complete silence, or worse, a ridiculous cover-up attempt. Ryazan Regional Governor Pavel Malkov, in an official statement, described the burning of a multi-million-dollar facility as falling debris. The Russian people are not stupid. They know the difference between falling debris and the strategic destruction caused by Ukraine's Bars jet UAVs. The situation at the Saratov refinery was even more dire. Sources speaking to Reuters said that after the first attack on November 11th, the facility halted primary processing, and that the November 14th attack could prolong this situation until the end of the month. Let's pause and analyze this. This was not a harassment attack, but an economic destruction operation. At least 4 major refineries are currently offline or operating well below capacity. This doesn't just mean less fuel for tanks and planes on the front lines. It also means more expensive gasoline for the Russian people, less export revenue for the Kremlin, and a bigger headache for Putin. Yes, we already mentioned the fuel crisis among these headaches. However, the military aspect of the story is much darker and more strategic than the fuel crisis and the civilian aspect. The real target is a very specific chemical product produced by this refinery: TS1 aviation kerosene. This is where BARS technology comes into play. BARS is a system that falls closer to the light cruise missile category than the drone category. According to data verified by OSINT analysts and Ukrainian sources, BARS can reach a range of up to 800 kilometers. More importantly, it can carry a warhead with up to 100 kilograms of destructive power. Its most important feature, however, lies in its speed. Its speed of 700 kilometers per hour makes it deadly and allows it to behave like a cruise missile. This speed, combined with its low-altitude capability and uncoupled radar data, is a major headache even for S-400s. Ukrainian military planners know that a simple propeller drone can start a fire in a storage tank, but facilities can be repaired quickly. However, the 100-kilogram warhead and kinetic energy carried by the BARS are designed to structurally destroy a facility, meaning to shatter complex processing units and pipeline racks. The statement from the Ukrainian General Staff was very clear. The attack hit processing units, fuel tanks, and pipeline racks. Ukraine wanted these facilities to be out of commission for weeks, maybe even months, not repaired, and it succeeded. This situation creates an impossible logistical dilemma for the Russian Air Force, VKS, and the Kremlin administration. What do we do with the limited fuel we have left? First, send the fuel to gas stations in Moscow and St. Petersburg to appease public anger and preserve the regime's stability. Second, send the fuel to the Su-34s and tanks at the front to continue the war. Now, let's see where these options lead us. The Ryazan refinery produces an average of 840,000 tons of high-quality TS1 jet fuel per year. That same night, hundreds of kilometers to the east, the Novokuybishevsk refinery in the Samara region, another giant with an annual processing capacity of 8.8 million tons, was also struck. It is a critical jet fuel supplier for the Russian army. So, who uses this TS1 fuel? Directly, the Russian Aerospace Forces, VKS. That is, the Su-34s that glide over Ukrainian cities every day, dropping those deadly glide bombs KAB. The Su-25s pounding the front lines, and the strategic bombers. Fuel for a warplane is not like gasoline for a car. It is an extremely pure liquid, containing special additives that can only be produced at specific facilities. Ukraine, using BARS jet UAVs, has turned Putin's bomber fuel tanks into ash. These attacks constitute a fuel embargo strategy that will leave Russian aircraft immobilized on the runway. The repercussions of these refinery attacks extend far beyond the burning tanks in Ryazan or the gasoline queues in Moscow, reaching directly into Europe's geopolitical security architecture and the heart of the Kremlin's war economy. To stop an army, you must first strike not at its tanks, but at the fuel that moves those tanks, and the coffers that turn that fuel into money. For months, there has been a chorus of justified and intense concern from the intelligence services of the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. The scenario was always the same. Russia will not stop after Ukraine. It will regroup, and within 3 years, attack NATO via the Suwalki corridor and engage in a conventional war with Europe. This perception of an existential threat, which has led Western capitals to increase their defense budgets, was based on the assumption that Russia has unlimited fuel reserves and an endless flow of petrodollars to fund this war. It is precisely at this point that we need to look at that incredible photo showing Putin's helplessness and buffoonery. This photo came from the Estonian border on November 15th, just as refineries in the heart of Russia were burning. Do you know what this is? This is a Russian soldier. More accurately, a mannequin soldier. Let's pause and analyze the irony of this scene. On one side, Vladimir Putin is trying to mobilize all of Russia and lock its economy into war by saying NATO is threatening our borders and the West will attack us. So, what remains of Russia's powerful army on that NATO border he calls a threat right across from Estonia? Scarecrows. This photo is less a comedy and more a document of tragedy. It shows how thin Putin's army has become. And Ukraine's attacks, which lasted until November 14th to 15th, and its BARS attacks in Ryazan and Samara debunk this frightening "Russia is coming" thesis on the ground, with kinetic reality. No war without fuel and money. There is a simple rule in modern warfare doctrine. Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. If Russia, as claimed, is going to wage total war against a technological giant like NATO in the European plains, it needs two essential liquids. Diesel, to drive thousands of T-90 tanks, armored personnel carriers, and logistics trucks to the Polish border. TS-1 jet fuel, to protect these tanks from NATO air power and ensure air superiority. By destroying specific facilities that produce aviation kerosene and diesel, such as those in Ukraine, Ryazan and Samara, Russia is physically eliminating its very capacity to invade Europe. A Su-35 fighter jet, without that special TS-1 fuel in its tank, is a $50 million immobile pile of metal on the runway, even if it is the most advanced fighter jet in the world. A tank division without fuel is just a 40-ton scrap heap blocking the highway. Ukraine is transforming the Russian army from a mechanized force into a static pile of targets. But the other side of the coin is far more devastating: money. Russia is a gas station state. Putin's war machine runs on hot money from oil sales. But here's a critical detail. There is a huge difference in revenue between selling crude oil and selling refined oil, diesel, gasoline, jet fuel. Refined products are value-added products and constitute the Kremlin's main profit margin. By striking refineries in Ukraine, Ryazan and Samara, Russia has been caught in two financial vice grips. When refineries are not operating, Russia cannot sell gasoline and diesel to the world. Indeed, Russia has been forced to ban gasoline exports to balance the domestic market. This means that the flow of billions of dollars in hot foreign currency into the Kremlin's coffers has been cut off overnight. Without money, it becomes impossible to buy weapons from China or Iran, pay soldiers' salaries, or prop up the falling ruble. The second issue is that the targeting of refineries is causing fuel prices to skyrocket in the domestic market. Rising logistics costs increase the price of everything from bread in the market to ammunition on the front lines. This means the Russian economy will rot from within and slide into hyperinflation. Europe's cheapest shield. This logistical and economic strangulation operation has mathematically reduced the likelihood of the scenario feared by the Baltic countries to almost zero. For a Russia that cannot produce enough fuel for civilian cars in its own domestic market, cannot find kerosene to fly its planes, and most importantly, has reached the point of bankruptcy because it cannot export, going to war with NATO is suicide. By cutting off both the fuel hose and the money tap of the Russian war machine, Ukraine is actually serving as the most concrete, cost-effective, and realistic security shield protecting the entire European continent. Every strike by Ukrainian drones vaporizes not just a refinery, but also Putin's capacity to threaten Europe, both financially and militarily. But this is only half the story, and this is where Putin's biggest dilemma lies. It is an economic trap. Western sanctions have cut off Russia's access to the critical spare parts it needs to repair these advanced refineries. Most of these facilities have been modernized over the past 30 years using technology from Western suppliers. The Russians are trying to replace them with domestic or Chinese-made components. However, this makes repairs much slower, much more expensive, and much lower in quality. Ukraine's strategy is precisely this: to strike faster than Russia can repair. Putin can activate his reserve capacity, but once that reserve capacity is hit, there will be nothing left. Chatham House's analysis reveals the real purpose of this strategy. The real purpose is to create internal economic pressure on Putin. Since these attacks began, gasoline prices in Russia have already risen by more than 10%. Gasoline shortages are reported in key regions such as Crimea, and the possibility of this crisis spreading to Moscow itself is becoming more serious due to these attacks. Putin needs oil revenues to finance the war. However, the attacks on Ukraine are forcing him into an irreversible choice. Will he export oil and make money? But then he cannot extinguish the fire in the domestic market and risks the anger of his people. Or will he cut exports and give the oil to the domestic market? Then he loses the billions of dollars in foreign exchange revenue he needs to finance the war. The International Energy Agency has already reported that Russia's oil revenues have fallen to one of their lowest levels since the start of the war. In either case, Putin is losing. This is what military analysts call a shift in power. Russia had absolute air superiority in 2022. In 2024, it relied on the S-400 Shield. Now, in November 2025, the Russian people are looking up at the sky and asking, where is our air defense? Putin's energy war boomerang has come back, and that boomerang is now tearing apart his own regime, his own economy, and the security lie he told his own people. The war is no longer being fought along abstract lines on a map. It is being fought at Moscow's gas pumps, in the emptying wallets of Russian citizens, and in the rusting wings of Russian jets left fuelless on the runway. While the Kremlin tries to condemn Ukraine to the cold and darkness of winter, it now feels the cold breath of its own fuel apocalypse on its neck. So, what do you think about this? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To stay updated on new videos, please subscribe to our channel and don't forget to turn on notifications. Thank you for choosing us.